All right, so we are up to day 186 of going through my old journal, and the quote for today says, "I've never met a strong person with an easy past." It says, "Has your past made you stronger? What's the hardest thing you've ever had to overcome?" So if you're following along, you might just pause and take a minute to think about how you would respond to this, and I will read what I wrote. Okay, so I said, not sure exactly how I feel about this question. On the one hand, I feel like growing up extremely wealthy with everything being handed to you could be a problem if you were ever in a situation where you had to fend for yourself. In that regard, I'd say people who've never had to struggle could be considered weak, or not even those who were extremely wealthy. I've known people who just always have people around them to handle the problems for them. But for those who aren't wealthy, eventually they start to run out of people to care for them. And I said, for instance, my dad. I said, in my case, it's a bit weird. I said, I don't feel like I had a bad or hard childhood, but sometimes when I tell people about it in my relationships with my parents, they look at me like I'm crazy for talking about things so casually. There have been times that I've struggled financially, but I didn't feel like it was that bad because I felt like I did have a little bit of a support system in my grandparents. I may not be able to continue living on my own, but I've always felt like I've had somewhere to go if I needed to. So yeah, I do feel like that it's maybe not always true, but I think, yeah, some of the strongest people out there are the ones that have had to overcome things. And I also think those people are the ones who also have kind of a better grip on reality, I guess, and they're more understanding of other people and the circumstances they go through. I think if you've just kind of had this certain type of life where everything was kind of easy, you never had to struggle financially, you never had to deal with maybe violence or things like that, that you kind of have this skewed perspective of what life is like for other people, and you may not have an understanding of where other people come from. And I think for a lot of my life, I was kind of naive to the struggles of other people, definitely in high school. We never really had to struggle too much for money. Like I said, we weren't super rich, but we had money to go out and do things, and I was just so oblivious to some of the other people that I was even friends with. I had a pretty varied, I think my friends group was pretty varied in terms of socioeconomic status, and I was just oblivious to people that were poor, I guess, even in my friends group. I don't know what I thought. I don't know. I was just kind of in my own little world, I guess. And we would go out to eat or whatever. And sometimes my mom would pay for all my friends if we wanted to go out to eat. And I guess I didn't really understand what it was like for people to really come from a low income family and not have gas money, or not have money to hang out with your friends or go to the movies every once in a while. I just was totally oblivious to that. I didn't judge people for being poor. I just didn't, I guess, I didn't grow up in a place that had a whole lot of poverty. There also weren't a whole lot of rich people either. I felt like most of the people were pretty much in somewhat the same, circumstances. So it didn't seem like there was as much of a gap between that. And even when I was around people who were, I don't know, I was just so oblivious and naive to all of that. And like I said, even there was times that I did struggle, but I never felt like it was like a hopeless, like I always felt like, okay, well, maybe I don't have enough money to have an apartment right now, but there's always the option. I've got this extra room at my grandma's house. I know that they would take me in. So I guess I never had that just like total fear of like, I'm gonna be homeless on the streets. Like, I've never had to deal with that. And I think the people that have had to deal with that have a greater, like, maybe gratitude and appreciation for when they do have enough. And I think it does make them stronger and more resilient. And I don't know, one thing I've been thinking about with like, there's like a lot of millennials going through this kind of like weird period of like, we were told our whole lives we have to go to school, and going to school will set you up to make you successful in life. So you can finish college and then you can, you know, buy a house and you can start a family and all this stuff. And a lot of people are like struggling, like realizing that that's probably not going to be the case for them. And I think there's like this cognitive like struggle that they're going with of like, well, this was how I saw my life turning out to be, and it's not turning out that way. And I think I didn't have that as much because I've never been that forward looking. I've never like had my life planned out in a way. Mine's always just been one step to the other. So like not having that wouldn't just totally destroy like my vision of my future or whatever, because I never really had a vision of the future. But I also think a lot of them are also like kind of struggling isn't new to them, because when you go to college, unless you just had really rich parents, you were struggling a little bit to some extent. Like, even if you had a scholarship, most kids in college like still had to work somewhat, and most kids in college had to deal with living with roommates. So kind of transitioning out of that college life, like most people still had that experience of like, okay, living with roommates, kind of like not having a lot of money to be able to do whatever they wanted. So I think a lot of millennials are a little bit resilient in that extent. So like, even if they did go to college, they still had to kind of like live the poor college student life. And so I don't know what I'm getting at, but yeah, like it does seem like people that have come from money and have had things really easy, or had come from like good families where, you know, you had your mom and your dad, and maybe you had a stay-at-home mom, and that was the life you knew. Like, you don't really understand like what it's like to not have that. I don't know, I'm just kind of rambling on this, I guess, but I think it kind of came, like, I had some friends in college that I recognized that they came to this realization that like their home life and their reality wasn't the same as what other people's were. And they had a hard time like understanding that like, okay, not everybody was raised the way I was. Like, maybe some people act or do these certain things because they didn't have like the family life that I had growing up, or things like that. And I think some of them, if they had some of that taken away from them, like they would struggle maybe a little bit more than people who have already been kind of struggling through things. And I think that's something we're seeing now. I think a lot of people are struggling because maybe their families didn't struggle, and now they're in a place where maybe some of these people who had already grown up poor, they're just like, yeah, this is how it is. Like, we've dealt with this our whole life. Like, you've got to deal with it. But I think there's a lot of people that weren't raised in that situation and are finding themselves in this situation now, that it's just kind of like a shock to them. And it's hard to kind of like switch over it. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I agree with it. I think maybe every strong person had a hard past, but I think a lot of people with hard past that were able to overcome it do come out to be stronger in the end. And I I think I would see myself maybe somewhere in the kind of in the middle, maybe, of like there were some things in my past, like with not having like that traditional family life that most people talk about, but like I don't know. I also don't feel like I've struggled that much, so, but I also don't feel like I'm a strong person. So maybe that could be why too. Like I don't have confidence in like, you know, strength. But I feel like I can deal with a lot. Like I feel like if challenges come at me, one of the things that I do is like I try not to worry about it. I try to be like, instead of like dwelling on like the negativity of like the bad things that are happening, I'm just kind of like, okay, how do I fix it? What do I need to do to fix it and get out of this? And that's kind of gotten me through most of the things. So yeah, anyway, that's what I had for that day. I'll be back tomorrow with day 187.